Why would a daughter take the extraordinary step of legally cutting her own mother out of her children's future? No warning, no public explanation, just a decision that left behind more questions than answers. For 2 years, the silence around Lisa Marie Presley's final choices has only grown louder, buried beneath interviews, carefully chosen words, and a story that never quite added up. But now something has shifted, because what Riley Keough knows, what she's been holding on to this entire time, has the potential to quietly unravel everything the world thought it understood about Priscilla Presley. And once you hear it, there's no going back. For 2 years, Priscilla Presley has been everywhere. On stages, in interviews, standing before cameras with a composed voice and carefully chosen words. Each appearance carried the same tone: reflection, grief, and a steady effort to shape how the story would be remembered. Journalists leaned in, audiences listened, and the narrative seemed complete on the surface. It felt polished, almost rehearsed, like every sentence had been weighed before it was ever spoken. But beneath all of that visibility, something essential was missing. Across countless conversations and public moments, one question lingered unanswered, quiet but impossible to ignore. Not the legal explanation that made headlines, not the technical arguments that filled court filings, but the deeper, more personal truth. Why would Lisa Marie Presley make a decision so final, so deliberate, without ever leaving behind a public explanation? It wasn't just a gap in the story, it was the center of it. And that absence doesn't feel accidental, because when every other detail is addressed, repeated, and refined, what's left unsaid begins to stand out even more. This wasn't about paperwork or procedure, not really. It was about something far more human, something that doesn't fit neatly into legal language or public statements. A reason that can't be reduced to technicalities, no matter how many times it's framed that way. All the while, someone has been watching, not speaking, not interrupting, not rushing to correct the narrative, but paying attention to every word, every omission, every carefully constructed version of events. Riley Keough hasn't needed a microphone to understand what's happening, because sometimes the person who says the least is the one who knows the most. And eventually, silence stops being an option. There's a crucial difference between Lisa Marie Presley and Riley Keough, one that quietly shapes everything that follows. Lisa Marie carried a weight few people could ever understand. Being the only child of Elvis Presley meant living inside a legacy that never loosened its grip. Every decision, every relationship, every mistake unfolded under a spotlight that never dimmed. She learned to protect, to absorb, to endure, often choosing silence over confrontation, even when that silence came at a cost. There were things she held in, things she chose not to expose, and over time, those choices became part of who she was. Riley grew up watching all of it, closely, quietly, and without interruption. But where her mother carried the weight, Riley studied it. She noticed what silence protected and what it allowed to continue. She saw how restraint could be mistaken for weakness, how patience could be taken advantage of, how stories could be shaped by whoever chose to speak the loudest. And instead of repeating that pattern, Riley adapted. She became more measured, more strategic, less reactive in moments where emotion might have taken over. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't saying everything you feel, it's knowing exactly when not to, until the moment finally comes when staying silent costs more than speaking. January 2023 changed everything. When Lisa Marie Presley passed, the world paused. Headlines filled with tributes, memories, and the kind of grief that felt both public and deeply personal. For a moment, it seemed like the story would remain one of loss and remembrance. But that moment didn't last, because not long after the mourning began, something unexpected surfaced. Priscilla Presley stepped forward, not just as a grieving mother, but as someone prepared to challenge what had been left behind. A legal move, filed quickly and decisively, that shifted the tone from sorrow to scrutiny almost overnight. What followed was even more striking, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Riley Keough didn't step in front of cameras. She didn't respond with statements, interviews, or emotional reactions. There were no public rebuttals, no attempts to control the narrative in real time. Instead, she disappeared from the noise. While speculation grew louder and opinions formed without her input, Riley remained still, almost invisible in a story that directly involved her. But behind that silence, something else was happening. Quiet conversations, careful decisions, and a level of preparation the public never saw. And that's where the difference lies, because it would have been easy to interpret that silence as hesitation or even weakness. But it wasn't. It was restraint, deliberate, controlled, and purposeful. Riley wasn't reacting to the moment. She was studying it, understanding it, and choosing her timing with precision. In a situation where emotions could have taken over, she chose distance. And sometimes the person who doesn't rush to speak is the one who's already thinking several steps ahead, waiting for the moment when what they say can't be ignored. From the very beginning, Priscilla Presley presented a version of events that, on the surface, sounded measured and reasonable. Her position leaned on legal ground, questions about technical irregularities, concerns over notarization, and whether certain documents truly met the standards required to be considered valid. It wasn't framed as conflict for the sake of control, but as responsibility. She positioned herself as someone stepping in to ensure everything was handled correctly, someone with decades of experience protecting a legacy that the world still watches closely. In that light, her actions could be seen not as interference, but as oversight, careful, necessary, even justified. And that version didn't just appear once, it was repeated, refined, and reinforced across interview after interview. The language stayed consistent, the tone steady, the message clear. This was a misunderstanding rooted in legal details, nothing more. Each time it was told, it became a little more familiar, a little more accepted. Over time, it began to settle into the public consciousness as the default explanation. But when a story is told often enough without interruption, the real question isn't just what's being said, it's what might be getting left out along the way. But there are details that quietly disrupt that version of events. Details that don't fit neatly into a narrative built on technicalities. Lisa Marie Presley didn't make a single, impulsive change and walk away. She revisited the decision and then reinforced it. Not once, but twice. Each amendment followed a process, each one structured, intentional, and carried out with the kind of care that suggests clarity, not confusion. These weren't last-minute adjustments made under pressure. They were actions taken with time, consideration, and purpose. And that's where the deeper implication begins to surface. Because people don't go through that level of effort, consulting, revising, securing, and repeating over something minor. You don't build layers of legal certainty just to fix a technical flaw. You do it when something matters enough to get right, no matter what. When the stakes are personal, not procedural. Because at its core, this isn't about paperwork, it's about trust. And when trust becomes the question, everything else starts to look very different. When Riley Keough finally began to speak, it didn't feel like an emotional reaction. It felt timed. There was no outburst, no visible frustration, no attempt to match the volume of what had already been said. Instead, her words arrived carefully, almost deliberately measured, as if every sentence had already been considered long before it was ever spoken. This wasn't someone breaking under pressure. It was someone choosing the exact moment when silence no longer served a purpose. And at the center of what she made clear was something simple, but powerful. Lisa Marie Presley knew exactly what she was doing. Not partially aware, not misled, not acting from confusion, but fully conscious of the decisions she made and why she made them. Riley didn't frame those choices as complicated legal maneuvers or questionable actions. She framed them as intentional, thought out, grounded in understanding. That distinction shifts everything because it replaces uncertainty with clarity, and clarity leaves far less room for reinterpretation. That's why her words carry so much weight, because they don't just add another perspective to the story, they quietly undermine the foundation of what's already been presented. If those decisions were deliberate, then the idea that they came from error, oversight, or diminished judgment begins to unravel. And once that possibility enters the conversation, it forces a much bigger question into the open, one that can't be dismissed as easily, and one that changes how every piece of this story is understood moving forward. When Riley Keough finally began to speak, it didn't feel like an emotional reaction. It felt timed. There was no outburst, no visible frustration, no attempt to match the volume of what had already been said. Instead, her words arrived carefully, almost deliberately measured, as if every sentence had already been considered long before it was ever spoken. This wasn't someone breaking under pressure. It was someone choosing the exact moment when silence no longer served a purpose. And at the center of what she made clear was something simple but powerful. Lisa Marie Presley knew exactly what she was doing. Not partially aware, not misled, not acting from confusion, but fully conscious of the decisions she made and why she made them. Riley didn't frame those choices as complicated legal maneuvers or questionable actions. She framed them as intentional, thought out, grounded in understanding. That distinction shifts everything because it replaces uncertainty with clarity, and clarity leaves far less room for reinterpretation. That's why her words carry so much weight, because they don't just add another perspective to the story, they quietly undermine the foundation of what's already been presented. If those decisions were deliberate, then the idea that they came from error, oversight, or diminished judgment begins to unravel. And once that possibility enters the conversation, it forces a much bigger question into the open, one that can't be dismissed as easily, and one that changes how every piece of this story is understood moving forward. What makes this moment even more significant is where the control now sits. Riley Keough isn't just part of the story. She's at the center of everything that moves forward. The estate, the decisions, the access to one of the most iconic legacies in cultural history all flow through her. And when that legacy traces back to Elvis Presley, access isn't just symbolic, it's power. It determines who gets to tell the story, who gets to shape it, and who gets left on the outside looking in. That shift changes the entire dynamic, because no matter how visible Priscilla Presley remains, her influence now operates within boundaries she doesn't control. Every appearance, every project, every opportunity to remain at the center of that legacy quietly depends on something else: permission. And that creates a long-term advantage that isn't loud or obvious, but incredibly effective. Because when one person controls the narrative and the access behind it, they don't need to say much at all. They just need to decide when and if the door stays open. Over time, Priscilla Presley has done something few people manage as effectively. She's built a version of the story that feels familiar, almost unquestioned. Through steady appearances, carefully framed interviews, and a consistent presence whenever the Presley name is discussed, she's positioned herself as the voice people turn to first. Not just a participant in the legacy, but the interpreter of it, the one who provides context, meaning, and continuity. And when that voice is heard often enough, it begins to carry authority, shaping how the past is remembered and how the future is understood. But standing quietly against that is a completely different approach. Riley Keough doesn't rely on repetition or visibility to hold influence. She speaks less, appears less, and leaves more unsaid. But what she holds carries weight that doesn't depend on volume. Where one strategy builds presence, the other builds leverage. And in the long run, the person who controls access, timing, and information doesn't need to compete for attention. Because when they do choose to step forward, everything else has to adjust around them. Lisa Marie wasn't lost in a haze of confusion, nor was she being pulled by unseen strings the way some would later suggest. The choices she made carried a deliberate weight, the kind that comes from clarity rather than chaos. There was intention in her actions, quiet, controlled, and deeply personal. If anything, what she left behind doesn't read like uncertainty at all. It reads like someone who understood far more than she ever said out loud. What makes it even more unsettling is the pattern she followed. She wasn't just reacting, she was recording, preserving, almost as if she knew the importance of capturing certain details before they slipped away or were taken from her. There's a difference between someone who is afraid and someone who is preparing, and Lisa Marie's behavior leans heavily toward the latter. It suggests she wasn't just sensing danger. She was identifying it piece by piece and making sure it couldn't be ignored forever. And then there's Riley. While others speculate, she doesn't have to, because she already knows. Not in fragments or guesses, but with a certainty that comes from seeing the full picture. The kind of knowledge that changes how you move, what you say, and most importantly, what you choose to keep hidden. Whatever Lisa Marie was trying to capture, Riley understands it completely, and that understanding may be the one thing holding everything else in place. Her silence wasn't the absence of power, it was the careful application of it. While others filled the space with statements, interviews, and polished narratives, she chose restraint, watching, listening, and waiting for the precise moment when her words would carry the most weight. That kind of silence isn't passive, it's calculated. It allows the story to unfold just enough to reveal its cracks before stepping in with something far more difficult to dismiss. And when her voice finally emerges, it doesn't ask for attention, it commands it. Because what she brings forward isn't just opinion or interpretation. It's a competing version of events rooted in proximity, memory, and something far more tangible. A version that doesn't align neatly with what's been repeated for years, and that's exactly why it unsettles everything around it. Carefully constructed narratives depend on consistency, on control, but her perspective introduces uncertainty, and with it, doubt. And once doubt enters the equation, even the most established story begins to shift in ways no one can fully predict. The real shift isn't happening in the present, it's unfolding in what comes next. The stories that will be told, the documentaries that will shape public memory, the biographies that claim to reveal the truth, all of them will depend on one critical factor: access. And access is no longer a neutral gateway, it's a filter. Every interview granted, every archive opened, every detail shared or withheld will quietly steer the narrative in a specific direction. Over time, those choices won't just influence perception, they will define it. Because at the center of it all stands someone who now holds the keys, not just to physical assets, but to perspective itself. The archives, the estate, the first-hand insights that can validate or dismantle long-standing beliefs. They're no longer widely available, they're controlled. And that control introduces a question that lingers beneath everything else. When multiple versions of the same story exist, and only one has the power to be fully told, which one actually becomes history? The tension doesn't come from something new being discovered. It comes from something that's been there all along, quiet, overlooked, or perhaps deliberately kept in the background. Because the truth in this story was never erased or lost to time. It was simply waiting. Waiting for the right moment, the right conditions, and more importantly, the right person willing to bring it forward. And now, with subtle shifts beginning to surface, it feels less like a revelation and more like an unveiling that was always inevitable, which leads to the question that lingers longer than anything else. Not whether the truth exists, but how much of it will actually be allowed into the light. Because as Riley begins to step out of the silence, even in the smallest ways, it changes the entire equation. Every word carries weight, every omission carries meaning. And the closer we get to hearing her side, the more uncertain it becomes. How much will the world truly hear? And how much will remain just out of reach?